Ever get that feeling where something simple, like a picture, an idea, a painting, can totally change everything you thought you knew? I had one of those moments inside a church. I was traveling and just popped in out of curiosity, not expecting anything big. It was one of those old historical churches with gorgeous stained glass, Gothic architecture, and that typical smell of old wood mixed with incense. I stood there for a few minutes in silence until I noticed a tiny detail in the corner of one of the stained glass windows. It was Jesus, but not the Jesus I was used to seeing. In that image, he had dark skin, hair like wool, and features that reminded me way more of the faces I see around me every day than anything I'd ever seen in those Easter movies from my childhood. The feeling was weird, intense, almost uncomfortable. And right away, a question popped into my head. Why does this hit me so hard? Maybe it's because my whole life I've been taught that Jesus was white. Not in so many words, of course. Nobody ever stood up in church and said, Jesus was European. But all you had to do was look around. The paintings, the kids' books, the movies, the pictures in churches. Jesus was always shown as a white guy with light eyes, wavy hair, and this calm look that almost seemed passive. That image was so common, so repeated, that I never even questioned it. Until that moment. When I got back home, I started doing some digging. Not in a skeptical way, but because I was genuinely thirsty to understand. Who is Jesus, really? Where is he born? What did he look like? What do the old texts say? And more importantly, why has his image been changed so much over the centuries? The first thing I found out just blew my mind. The Bible doesn't describe Jesus as a white man. Actually, it barely describes what he looked like in detail at all. But in the few verses that do, like in Revelation 1 verses 14 to 15, we find some surprising descriptions. His hair was white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were like blazing fire. His feet were like bronze glowing in a furnace. Feet like burnt bronze, hair like wool. Those words aren't accidental. They're not just random poetry. They talk about color, texture, real physical characteristics that are way different from the classic Renaissance paintings. But what shocked me the most wasn't just what the Bible said. It was what history hid. Actually, what it deliberately whitewashed. For centuries, especially starting with the Renaissance, European artists like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo started painting Jesus with the features of their own people. Maybe not out of direct malice. It was common for artists to use local models for religious figures. The problem is that, over time, these images stopped being just art. They became visual doctrine. As European colonization spread around the world, these Eurocentric portraits of Jesus were taken everywhere. From Africa to Asia, across the Americas, the world received not just a religion, but a subtle, powerful, and silent image of a white God. And that image shaped the collective imagination of billions of people. Think about it for a second. If the Savior is white, what does that say about who's closer to God? What kind of subconscious message has been fed to us over the centuries, where the divine has blue eyes and fair skin, and everything different is seen as secondary, lesser, unworthy? That's where things get explosive. Representation matters. Image is power. And it's not just a historical issue. The impact still echoes today. In every black child who grows up wondering why no heroes or holy figures look like them. In every believer who feels more distant from spirituality because everything sacred to them has the face of the colonizer. In every church that repeats, without even realizing it, a pattern of visual exclusion. But you know what's the most beautiful thing about all this? There's a silent revolution happening, and it's already started. Today, black theologians, decolonial artists, marginalized communities, and researchers around the world are rebuilding the image of Jesus, not as an act of revenge, but as an act of historical and spiritual justice, a reunion with the truth, a gesture of liberation. Because recognizing that Jesus had dark skin and the features of the people of the Middle East in the first century is more than just fixing a painting. It's recovering a stolen identity. It's allowing more people to see themselves as worthy, as part of the sacred story. It's taking faith back from the hands of oppression and giving it back to the people. I still remember the look on this lady's face I saw in a small chapel in the Brazilian countryside. When she saw for the first time a picture of Jesus with black skin, she cried. "He looks like my son," she said. "He looks like my father." In that moment, Jesus stopped being a distant figure and became someone she could relate to. And that connection changes everything. That's why I invite you to look at Jesus again, not with the eyes of imposed tradition, but with the eyes of truth. A truth that was hidden, distorted, and manipulated, but that insists on emerging. Look at Jesus as a man of his time from his land, a man who lived among the poor, who fled to Egypt, who mixed with ordinary people, a man who stood up to the empire and died unjustly, a man with dark skin, with hair like wool, a man like so many others who have been erased from history. This image isn't just more accurate, it's revolutionary. And maybe when we see Jesus as he really was, we can start to see ourselves as we really are too, worthy, strong, spiritual, in the image of the divine. Have you ever stopped to think about how much power an image can hold? I mean, not just beauty, artistic expression, or religious meaning. I'm talking about real, structural power. Power that shapes beliefs, defines social roles, and even justifies the oppression of entire peoples. When we look at the history of humanity, we see that wars have been fought over symbols, flags, coats of arms, crosses, colors. But there's one specific image that has endured through centuries with terrifying strength, the white image of Jesus. And this is where things start to get uncomfortable. Because the question isn't just, why was Jesus portrayed as white? But rather, who benefited from it? History is more strategic than spiritual. The truth is that the image of Jesus was carefully redesigned, not by divine revelation, but by human interests. In Renaissance Europe, between the 14th and 17th centuries, artists like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael began to paint Jesus with European features. Fair skin, long, brown hair, fine and symmetrical features. It was the ideal of beauty at that time. The thing is, these images created inside noble workshops ended up being exported as universal truths. And what started as art became doctrine. When European empires began to colonize the world, Africa, Latin America, Asia, they didn't just bring soldiers and trade. They also brought crosses, priests, churches, and paintings with a white Jesus. This image was more than decoration. It was a strategy of cultural domination. Just imagine, a group of people shows up with weapons in an unknown land, saying that their religion is the true one. And when they show the Son of God, the Savior, he looks exactly like them. White, European, imposing. Meanwhile, the local people with dark skin, kinky hair, and their own cultures are called savages, pagans, and sinners. This visual contrast was devastating because it wasn't just about religion. It was a way to legitimize racial hierarchy. If even heaven is white, then what's left for everyone else? And this logic spread like deep roots everywhere. That was colonized. In Africa, European Christianity was used to weaken ancestral religions. In Brazil, the image of a white Jesus was placed in slave quarters, next to the whip, as a tool for emotional control. In Asia, Churches reproduced Western symbols that devalued an entire ancient heritage. And what do all these things have in common? Image, representation, appearance. White Jesus became more than a familiar face. He became a silent authority, a symbol of purity, superiority, and domination. And as a consequence, everything different from that began. To be seen as inferior, impure, distant from God. I remember reading a letter from a European missionary from the 19th century. He said that teaching black people the face of Christ is the first step to civilizing them. Read that sentence again. It's not about salvation. It's about colonizing the soul. But the most messed up thing about this whole story is that this image wasn't just forced on colonized people. It got internalized. Generations grew up believing that the sacred had a specific color, that God preferred a certain type of face, that to get closer to the divine, it was necessary in some way to become whiter inside and out. And this has consequences even today. Have you ever noticed how many black religious leaders avoid talking about what Jesus looked like? How many churches in predominantly black communities still display portraits of a blonde, blue-eyed Messiah? That's not a coincidence. That's historical trauma. But there's a growing movement of reclaiming. Today, Afro-descendant, indigenous, and Asian communities are questioning this single, dominant representation. They're recovering their own ways of representing the sacred. They're painting, sculpting, writing, and preaching a Jesus who looks like them. A Jesus who understands their pain, their culture, their color. And honestly, that's revolutionary. Because when a people takes back control of the image of their Savior, they also take back control of their own history. They say, we are also divine. We are also made in God's image. And we don't need to change to be loved by Him. That's why the image of Jesus isn't a minor detail. It's a mirror. And for centuries, that mirror was shaped to reflect only one face. Now, we're starting to shatter it. Not to destroy it, but to rebuild it with all possible faces. Think about it. If Jesus came for everyone, why does He only look like some? The answer lies in history, but the solution lies in the present. By rebuilding the image of Jesus, we also rebuild collective spirituality. A faith that doesn't exclude, but embraces. That doesn't oppress, but liberates. That doesn't impose a standard of beauty, but celebrates human diversity. It's not just about religion. It's about identity, about dignity, about breaking invisible chains that taught us to doubt our own worth. And with every new image of Jesus with dark skin, with the features of His people, with the typical clothes of His time, a part of that system of oppression weakens. And a new faith, more true, more just, more human, begins to be born. If there's one thing that deeply moves me, it's seeing faith reinvent itself. Seeing people find in the sacred no longer a broken mirror, but a real reflection. Today, we're living through a historic moment. A moment where Jesus is being rescued. Not with violence, nor with imposition, but with love, with research, with courage. We're facing a silent but powerful phenomenon, the resurgence of the Black Messiah. And I'm not talking about a new religion or a sect. I'm talking about a symbolic and spiritual reparation that crosses continents and generations. Jesus, for centuries represented with European features, is now being reinterpreted in the light of history, archaeology, and social justice. But where does this transformation start? In the margins, in the small churches, in the grassroots movements, in the hands of artists and pastors who decided to give Jesus back His true identity, not as an imposition, but as liberation. Have you ever heard of Black liberation theology? It emerged in the United States in the 1960s, in the heart of the civil rights movement. One of its main thinkers, James Cone, wrote that Jesus is black because he identifies with the oppressed. That gave me chills the first time I read it, because for the first time, Jesus' color wasn't a cosmetic detail. It was a political and spiritual statement. Cohen wasn't saying Jesus was born in sub-Saharan Africa. He was saying that if Jesus were walking the streets of Chicago or Rio de Janeiro or Kinshasa today, he'd be with the poor, the excluded, the racialized. And that changes everything. The image of the white Christ, used to justify slavery and colonization, gives way to a Christ in solidarity with the pain of his people. This concept wasn't limited to the US. In Latin America, theologians like Leonardo Boff and Gustavo Gutierrez began to talk about a faith turned towards the poor, towards the marginalized. And soon, Black and indigenous communities began to represent Jesus with their own features. It was as if the people were saying, now, Jesus looks like us. And it didn't stop there. In recent years, we've seen this transformation gain ground in pop culture, contemporary art, and even technology. An impressive example was the facial. Reconstruction done by British forensic anthropologists in collaboration with Israeli archaeologists. They created an image based on remains from Galilee in the 1st century. The result? A man with dark skin, short, curly hair, a wide face, and a deep gaze. Nothing like the European Jesus. That image went viral around the world, and it sparked debate for sure. Many rejected it, called it heresy, politically incorrect. But others, millions, looked at that face and said, now it makes sense. Artists like Kehind Wiley, who painted Barack Obama's presidential portrait, began to paint Jesus in African attire with dark skin, placed in contemporary scenes. Independent films, series, comics, and exhibitions around the world began to propose a plural, diverse, relatable Jesus. And all of this matters, because when you see a Jesus who looks like you, something inside you wakes up. It's like spirituality finds a new place inside your chest. A deeper, more real place. This isn't about identity politics. It's about belonging. I've heard stories from young Black people who said they felt, for the first time, like going to church after seeing a picture of a Black Jesus. I've seen entire communities get emotional while singing praises in front of a mural where Christ had African features. This is living faith. This is real spirituality. Of course, there's still resistance. After all, messing with images is messing with structures. Some people say, but Jesus' color doesn't matter. And my answer is always the same. If it really didn't matter, why did they try so hard to make him white? The truth is, representation does matter, because it shapes how we see ourselves before God. And for a long time, they made us believe that God only had one face. Now we're rediscovering that the face of God can have 1,000 forms, including ours. And Jesus? Jesus is being reborn, not in celestial bodies, but in the streets, in the ghettos, in the communities, in the hearts that have started beating again with hope when they look at a Messiah who looks like them. This Jesus isn't new. He's always been there. The difference is, now we're ready to see him. A lot of people ask, but why does this matter so much? Why should Jesus' color be relevant if his message is what's most important? And in a way, that question seems fair. It seems logical, but when you dig a little deeper, you realize that behind that question, there's a bigger discomfort, an attempt to protect an image that was created, reinforced, and imposed over centuries. So, I answer with another question. If Jesus' color really doesn't matter, why do they go to so much trouble to make him white? The answer is simple and yet profound. Because image is power, and power, historically, has been centralized. It's been reserved. It's been protected at all costs. For centuries, we've been taught, directly or indirectly, that God's face was white, and that shaped how we see everything, what's divine, what's beautiful, what's pure, what's trustworthy. Faith became an extension of colonialism, and spirituality became just another layer in building a racial hierarchy that excludes millions. When you grow up seeing that all the sacred figures look like another culture, another people, another color, that leaves a mark. It marks your self-esteem. It marks how you see yourself in the world, and even more before God. The black child who only sees a white Jesus starts to wonder, even unconsciously, am I loved less by God? It might seem subtle, but it's not. This shapes generations. It creates a sense of distance from the sacred. It makes people feel like they need to adapt, to erase themselves, to become whiter, not just physically, but spiritually, to be accepted. And that's why this debate matters so much today. We're living in a time of reevaluation, a time when social, academic, and spiritual movements are firmly saying, enough. Enough of silencing stories. Enough of making bodies invisible. Enough of turning the divine into an exclusive for some. Jesus' color matters because it represents a reconciliation with historical truth. But more than that, it represents an act of symbolic resistance, a reclaiming of dignity, a reunion with the divine that doesn't exclude, but includes. When we represent Jesus as a dark-skinned man, we're saying to the world, the sacred also dwells here. We're saying to black children that they too reflect the image of God, that there features their history, their culture, all of that is worthy, is beautiful, is spiritual, and this impact is real. Studies in psychology and neuroscience show that visual representation deeply influences behavior, self-esteem, and a sense of belonging. A 2018 experiment revealed that children exposed to images of heroes and religious figures who looked like them showed greater self-confidence and empathy. In other words, seeing yourself in the sacred transforms. But it's not just in churches that this needs to happen. The media, education, art, all these spaces need to reflect the diversity of the sacred. We need to see Jesus portrayed in different ways: black, indigenous, Asian, Arab, poor. Because Jesus was first and foremost human, and his humanity is what connects us to his divinity. Imagine what this could mean for a society like ours, marked by so much exclusion and inequality. A black Jesus is more than a historical correction. It's a political provocation. It forces us to rethink who has access to power, who is socially legitimized, who is seen as a reference for morality and spiritual authority. The figure of a black, poor, marginalized Jesus invites us to see faith not as a comfort zone, but as a call to action. As Dom Helder Kamara said, "When I give food to the poor, they call me a saint. When I ask why they are poor, they call me a communist." True faith isn't limited to prayers and dogmas. It demands a stance. It demands justice. And the most curious thing is that this rediscovery of Jesus' image isn't a recent fad. It's in the roots of original Christianity. It's in historical accounts, ancient African traditions, Ethiopian icons. It was just hidden, erased, and now it's coming back with full force. It's no wonder so many black churches, especially in the United States, have reclaimed this image. A Jesus who understands the pain of oppression, who lived through what it's like to be persecuted, rejected, silenced. A Jesus who didn't come to maintain the order of the empire, but to overthrow it. This Jesus aligns with racial justice movements, with the uprisings against structural racism, with the fight for equity. He becomes a symbol of resistance, of hope, of inner power. A Jesus who doesn't impose, welcomes, who doesn't judge, understands, who doesn't demand aesthetic transformation, offers radical love. And that's why, today, more than ever, we need this image. Not because we want to make Jesus an instrument of culture wars, but because we want to recognize his true mission to liberate. And there's no liberation without truth. There's no healing without facing it. There's no authentic faith without the courage to look the past in the eye and say, enough with the lies. If you're a Black, Indigenous, or any marginalized person, I want you to know you are the image of God. And it's not institutional religion, nor the paintings in the cathedral that define that. It's your existence. It's your dignity. It's your right to belong to the sacred. And if you grew up only seeing a white Jesus, but you're willing to deconstruct that, congratulations. You're part of the transformation. You help build a more honest, broader, more human faith. At the end of the day, Jesus' color matters because we matter. And as long as there's someone feeling excluded from the story of salvation because they don't look like the traditional portrait, the fight for truth will continue. After everything we've talked about here, I want to ask you a sincere question. If Jesus has always been portrayed with white skin, even without historical basis, what else have they hidden from us in the name of faith? This question has echoed within me for a long time. Because we're not just talking about painting, art, or tradition. We're talking about identity, belonging, and power. Throughout this journey, we've revisited history with courage. We've seen how the image of Jesus was shaped to serve a colonial project. We've seen how spirituality, which should liberate, was used as a tool for control. But we've also seen resistance. We've seen living faith in the margins, in the Quilombos, in the favelas, in the toreros, in the Black churches that dared to paint a Christ with a familiar face. And the most powerful thing is that this Christ isn't new. He's always been there, silenced, hidden, whitewashed, but alive. Jesus, the historical man, was born in Bethlehem, lived in Galilee, grew up in a Semitic and African culture, in a land marked by occupation and resistance. He wasn't born in Rome. He didn't speak Latin. He didn't have blue eyes. He was born among the marginalized, and he died as a political criminal. This is the truth that many have tried to erase. But now it's resurfacing, not as revenge, but as healing. Seeing Jesus with dark skin is an act of spiritual justice. It's declaring that Black and racialized bodies are not only worthy of God's love, they are a reflection of his image. And that changes everything. It changes how we see ourselves, how we raise our children, how we build churches, how we pray. For centuries, we've been taught that the divine lived in the distant, in the European, and what was different from us. Today, we're learning that the divine lives in the mirror, in our curly hair, in our melanin skin, in our ancestry. And that doesn't distance God. It brings him closer. He's always been by our side. We were just looking the wrong way. And look, this isn't a battle against anyone. This is a journey for everyone. Because reclaiming the true image of Jesus isn't just a racial issue. It's a matter of truth, freedom, and love. And the more we understand this, the more Christianity will stop being a weapon, and will go back to being what it always was, a message of compassion, equality, and justice. We're living through an awakening, a new time. The voices that were once silenced are now writing their own gospels, and the walls, once adorned with unreal images, are starting to receive new faces. Faces that carry scars, stories, joys, pains, and glories. Faces that can finally look up to the sky and say, I too am the image and likeness of God. And if you've made it this far with me, listening to all of this, reflecting with an open heart, all I can say is thank you. Really, thank you for having the courage to rethink. Thank you for being willing to see beyond the stained glass and the conventions. Thank you for seeking a more honest faith, closer to reality, more inclusive. This journey doesn't end here. It's only just begun. What we do with this knowledge is what defines the future of our spirituality. And I invite you, with all humility, to continue on this journey, to study, to question, to dialogue, to teach others, to paint new images, to sing new praises, to welcome the sacred that dwells in every body, in every story, in every skin tone. If this message resonated with you, if it touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel here. Be part of this community that believes in a more just, more spiritual, more truthful world. Share this video with someone who also needs to hear this truth. Let's spread this light. Let's recover what was lost. Let's retell the story. Jesus has always been with us, but now we're finally ready to see him as he really is. Until next time,